50 people already. Wow. We're booming. We're booming. What is going on, guys? Welcome to the Power Hour with my buddy Shad Frazier over at Endeavor Energy Resources, one of the largest private operators in the U.S. Shad is the VP of operations over there, has been over there for quite some time. Shad, how long have you been over at Endeavor now?
So I've been here over 7 years now. So it's been quite an experience.
And you guys have just like a crazy growth story that you were telling me about. And so I'm excited to dive into everything you guys are doing on the emissions front. This has been, it's the biggest topic, and rightfully so. Methane is a part of the products that you guys sell. That is the gas part of oil and gas, right? And it's a ever evolving landscape. There's lots of new regulations. There's lots of new pressure, some of which you guys may not face being private, and we can kind of like dive into that. There's also the societal pressure. There's the this kind of responsibility aspect, and then going back to what I said, like this is a product that you guys are selling, and I want to dive in today to, you guys have been building like your emissions tech stack from detection to quantification to just like there's just so much like taken into consideration. So I want to dive into like the thought process behind it. We want to dive into the challenges, the opportunities. You and I had kind of chatted briefly about the economics of this. I think that was really eye-opening for me. I think a lot of people see this as being as a cost center with not a lot of ROI. And I was very surprised at some of the stuff that you told me. So let's start off with, where did this kind of journey begin for you guys to really kind of take a closer look at what you guys are doing on the emissions side?
So I think it really started for us when we started seeing that the public data warehouses, things like Drilling Info and Rystad and some of these companies, were putting out reports and discussing for us, where did we stand with everyone else in the space of methane emissions. And when we started looking at the stats and looking at the figures, we were at the bottom of the barrel. And as a company, we never want to be at the bottom of the barrel of anything. So we decided, okay, what are the first steps we need to start doing to try to figure some of this out? So we went through a kind of systematic review of what could we do, what did it set up for the future, and what technology could we apply that wouldn't be a manpower burden upon the overall organization to implement. So we started first off just looking at how do we just start detecting where are we emitting and what could we do. So the first thing that comes to mind was doing aerial surveys, and they were kind of a brand new thing. 2018, we were already flying our pipelines to make sure we didn't have any leaks. So this was just a little tack on going above and beyond just doing flyovers.
And these are just the small flyover planes, right?
Right. And so we're starting off at 3,000 feet. And so we're flying over at 3,000 feet. We're getting quantification of, hey, you've got a leak here, you've got a leak there. How do you fix those things? So we started then building that data, taking it into an integrated operations center and saying, we're going to start cataloging all of these events, figuring out when they are, and then more importantly, building out a maintenance team that would then go out and go fix these events to make sure that they didn't last. So we would get an event, that event would then trigger an email to us, we'd see it, we catalog it, and then we're out within 48 hours to 72 hours fixing the event and making sure it doesn't happen again. Well, what we found was that we were having such a delay sometimes in between our flyovers and the times that we could actually get out to the field and LiDAR to see where the events were, that we wanted to see if there was a better way. So you're not saying that we didn't want to stop doing the aerials, because the aerials were giving us good quantification of where we were versus everyone else, giving us great quantification of just what was going on in the industry, that we started adding on to it, looking at two different options. And the first option was looking at on-site detection, and lots of people that really started out with just trying to find the right meter on site, building that into the technology stream, and then seeing how we could implement it. But on top of it, all these meters were doing was giving us indications of we were getting methane. But where exactly was that? So we added to it another set of aerial, and that aerial was doing fixed wing or helicopter, not fixed wing, but rotor wing aircraft. And the helicopters were able for us to then go out and go see exactly which Inardo valve was leaking, where we were having leaks, even odd things. We found a leak in a field where a farmer had plowed over a pipeline, and it was an old vertical well, but that vertical well was still making gas, but it was leaking gas into the middle of his field where his plow had cut the pipeline. So we were able to immediately, the helicopter pilot called us, we called the farmer, said, okay, you got to shut down because we've cut the pipeline here and it's too dangerous for you to be plowing in the field right now. So, all of this at the end of the day, though, was about how do we capture every molecule that we produce. And as you were talking about, there is a cost and a benefit to this service. So how do we make sure that those two weigh each other out? And what we found is that by capturing all of the gas that we possibly could, and making sure that as much of our gas was going down a sales line, we were able to pay off all of the services that we were building out. And each of the services had an ROI of, a rate of return on these projects was over 100%. So the total cost was negligible versus the amount of gas we were able to capture and then put down a sales line and sell. And at the end of the day, we're all out here doing the same thing, which is trying to create as much energy as possible so that the rest of the world can benefit from that energy. So why aren't we doing the best we can to capture every molecule we produce?
So despite all of the technicians and the work and everything and the technologies and everything you've had to do, it's still a massive ROI for you guys.
It has been. And, at the end of the day, we are all stewards for what we've been given. No oil and gas company owns, or very few actually own the minerals. We're all renting those, minerals from a landowner. So what we're really being is a better steward for those landowners of the minerals that they're allowing us to produce. So that's where we kind of looked at the end of the day is how do we be the best steward for the land? And, as a lot of us are Boy Scouts and amongst the group, it's like, how do we leave no trace behind? How do we make sure that everything we do does the best we can for society?
What were some of the initial culprits that you found that were some of the biggest emitters that you guys were able to fix?
And we're still finding these. And Nardo valves are best tank tops. Most everyone understands in the industry that when we build hydrocarbon storage vessels, these vessels are very low pressure vessels. They only hold 16 ounces. Well, when we did our first designs, we were looking at the fact that we had 8-ounce design tanks. And we figured out real quick there was not enough gap between the pressure of the Nardo valve going off and how much we were storing on our tanks. We only had 2 ounces of pressure differential. So we actually went through a design change and went to 16-ounce tanks to give us more of a buffer so we weren't having those type of leaks. So we went through those type of things. Then we started realizing, okay, we need to build not just high pressure flares, but low pressure flares, and then adding VRUs, capturing as much of this gas that we're getting coming off of this oil. And it's really changed our overall design. We talk about internally that we've gone through 3 design stages of our batteries, and each one of those design stages has been about how do we do a better job of capturing every molecule that we produce and finding a way to get it to a sales point.
Did you, I'm sorry, I was frozen there for a second. Did you have to assemble any sort of internal task team, or was this mostly in the operations team?
So this was mostly inside of the operations team. And the operations team, I love my team because I'm the dreamer. I come up with the ideas, and my team is the execution group that kind of figures out how do we make this happen. I try to keep vendors from calling me and talking to me because that just means more work for my team. Because people come to me and they pitch stuff, and I love the pitches, but at the end of the day, my execution teams are the one that have to live with it. So I really start off with the idea of, hey, we want to be a better steward. And then I push that off to the team, and then my team of people, led up by Damon Brumley and Scott Waycaster in my integrated operations center, they're going out and really finding what is the best application, best services, best tools to help us find what works best. And we went through trial and errors, but as I've told my team, I want them to fail fast. So we went through trials, but we didn't sit on trials for a long period of time. We'd go through a 2-3 month trial, and we're out, and we decided to pull the trigger. So when we went from just doing the aerial surveys to actually putting detection on the ground, that transition time ended up being somewhere around 4 to 6 months, that we went from having 100 plus facilities that were just being aerial surveyed. Now all of my horizontal facilities have 4 meters on them, and then we're able to triangulate methane leaks anywhere on our facilities. And all that data was being gathered, put up to the cloud. That cloud service was then able to push the data to us and apply it to our integrated operations center. And now it's become a part of our daily package. And it is actually helping us with other things. So, I had an email this morning where our on-site SOFI meters that we're using, from a product that's out there, those meters were able to detect a gas leak last night at 10 o'clock at night. So we had a night pumper go out. That night pumper went out, found that we had a sight glass that had blown, and we were having a leak on the location. So we went from having an alarm to having someone on site in 30 minutes. The valve closed, and so instead of having a spill that could have been 20 hours, 10 hours, now we had a spill that lasted us 2 hours or less. All the spill contained, and we're already cleaning everything up this morning. So, it's not always everyone worries about the technology, worries about the implementation, but at the end of the day, what it's actually allowing us to do is be a better steward of what we've been given. And now we're capturing more, we're having less leaks, having less cleanup events, and those less cleanup events means less costs on our LOE because we're not out having to clean things up. Our operations are cleaner and more efficient.
I love that. I want to dive a little bit more into kind of maybe the specifics of the tech stack as much as in depth as you want to go into.
Mhm.
Starting off in the evaluation process, we hosted an event about 2 years ago called Zero. It was really focused on a lot of the emissions technology. And the reason we did that was because I was having a ton of conversations with these new startups that were popping up in this space who were, kind of just playing in this field. And it was a little overwhelming for me to understand which kind of part of this value chain they kind of play a role in, what integrates with what. And so I'm kind of curious on like building versus buying versus like figuring stuff out yourself. Like, what is kind of the state of technology? And then from there, like, are there any kind of like key technologies that you want to dive into that have kind of played a key role for this?
Sure. When we really looked at it, for us, it was about, all right, we know we're going down this path. And we, like you, were realizing that this path was going in many different directions at the same time. So we went out, talked to a group of vendors, went out, ran multiple different tests to see which vendor would give us the best product right off the bat. And it didn't mean that that was the very best product for the day. It was going to have to be what was the best product that we could use, and knowing that that product may not be the product we use 6 months from now, knowing that it's going to change. So we went with the idea that we didn't want to buy anything. What we wanted to do was rent the equipment, but find a system that we could implement very quickly, integrate it with the existing systems, and pull that trigger. So the system we went with was from one of our ESP providers who was already gathering data on our sites. They were able to tack their device on top of what we were already all the data we were gathering on the ESPs, and had their data on top of that. And so it ended up being an integrated data gathering point and pushing all that data out to us through a cloud service. Now, you worry about that fact that all that data is going to a cloud, but there's so much security going on out there that it was really about practical application. And for a lot of operators, if you're going small scale and trying to roll this out, you can use lots of different vendors because those vendors could build and match what your need was and catch up to you. We were playing catch up in the fact that we needed to have 400 devices installed today. So we went with a vendor that could actually meet that need. And we went through a 4-month installation process. And you talk about installing 400 devices all at one time. It was huge for us on being able to capture all that, get it in place, and then getting it turned into our data center. And so it was really about finding this ultimate package. And then what we found is that our vendor that we were working with was like, okay, well, we're capturing methane. How about we also look at how do we capture H2S? And now our methane detectors have H2S detectors on them. So now they're not just detecting if there's methane on the location, they're detecting if there's H2S, and they're setting a beacon on the first meter that's closest to the entrance to the pad. So now as our employees are coming onto a location, the location is safer because they know that they don't have to worry about any H2S when they got on the location. They're still going to wear their monitors, still going to be doing it, but the location is safe because they can see that there's no beacon. So we're gathering H2S, we're gathering methane, but at the same time, all of this is rental. And if at the end of the day we find a better product, we can go out and change those things out and move to something else.
Let's talk about the cloud that you guys are using. Is that going into something generic like an Azure or an AWS, or is that going into something that is more like a specific software that is built for handling emissions data?
So it's going through our vendor that is putting it into their cloud service that then
Okay.
is sending it to us. But then we gather all of that data through our SCADA system, and we're actually pushing it through. It's an AWS service, but we're using. You would catch me on this. I can't even remember the name. Snowflake, and Snowflake is allowing us to gather all of our data from not just our ESPs, not just our methane detection, but every piece of our data is going into, we like to describe it, we have a lake house. We don't want a data warehouse. We don't want a data warehouse. We want a lake house, because everyone likes to go to the lake house. No one wants to go to a warehouse. So we wanted everyone to be able to go to the lake house, get the data out, and use it accordingly. So we're taking the data they give us, pushing it into that lake data warehouse, data lake, and then allowing everyone in the company to have access to it so that they can make better decisions about it.
Now, is it capturing just the quantities and the locations of where this is coming from? Is there any other data that comes along with that in terms of, like, I don't know if there's intensities or grades of the methane? Like, kind of walk me through, like, what all is captured and what are you guys using that for?
So right now, the tools are very good at telling us that we have a leak, but the quantification of total volume is where things are kind of lacking. So we're working with them to try to find a good way to make those quantifications even better. There's new Quado rules that are coming out with Subpart W. Subpart W is going to require for real direct measurement type of loss, of understanding how much methane is being lost. And so that's the next step and next iteration. That has to be in place in 2025. So we're working with our vendors, working with them to help them figure out ways to be better quantified so that we can get their devices as part of the new Quado Subpart W. Right now, only thing they're allowing is LiDAR cameras, which are the best tools for gathering that data. But the problem with LiDAR tools is it requires trained technicians to run them. Well, there's not enough manpower in the oil patch today. We talk about the fact that unemployment in Midland is sitting at 2%. If the entire oil patch had to go through and have certified LiDAR technicians going out and running cameras all across all of our assets all the time, there was no way to do it. I run a team of 6 teams that are doing that to just capture all of my assets twice a year. And if I was having to capture this on a monthly basis across all of my assets, now we're talking about having to increase by 6-fold the type of staff that I would need to do LiDAR technician. There's not that many LiDAR techs out there. So we want to find a best tool for the application and find that tool that can do the best job for us to solve the problem, as well as take care of the service, take care of the wells. It has to be manpower efficient as well as do the job.
So you're touching on some of the regulations here, which I think are some of the ones that were kind of imposed with the new Inflation Reduction Act. Can you expand upon that for any other operators who are watching? What does it state? What are the implications? And then I think you and I chatted a little bit about some of the gray areas.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things we're seeing with the IRA Act, and this is, it's government. Their job is to find ways to regulate things to meet the demands of everyone out there. So Subpart W is part of Quado B, which is where all new equipment going out, new builds are having to meet the standards. And those new standards are requiring no methane use or no gas loss use devices. So intermittent bleed devices are no longer tolerated. They want to have closed loop systems where we're capturing all of it. Great, we can do that. But Subpart W is taking it to the next step where they want to be able to quantify every part of methane that is lost in a system. And in that is where we start running into our issues, because they want to have direct quantification of a number, and they want to have a camera that is running at looking at each one of these and when does it open and when does it close. So they want to know total time. And if you don't know how long that leak has been going on, they're going to hit you with a minimum volume of every day that it could have happened, it could have been on. So that's where we run into the issues on the fact that if you do not have a camera on a site or have something looking at a site, then that site can be hit with this minimum threshold number for every day passed. And then that goes into your total methane emission for the year. And you only have so much before you go over a threshold. And that threshold then becomes a taxable event in the IRA Act. So multiple operators that are out in the basin now are looking at these $1 million yearly taxable events that are about to get hit with the IRA Act starting in 2025. So how do we go about trying to find the best tool? And right now they want LiDAR, and I joke about it on the fact that the reason why they went with LiDAR is because LiDAR is a military tech, and military industrial complex wrote the laws. So oil and gas space didn't write the laws. So we have lots of companies that are out here that people are just now really kicking off since COVID that are really about trying to find the best methane capture device. And we're all out here trying to do what's best, but we need regulation that is not just reasonable, but is feasible. Colorado's tried to impose these rules inside their state with LiDAR technicians, and they are grossly understaffed in the state of Colorado to be able to do the LiDAR work, to be able to do camera work on all these facilities and capture it. So they're running into this issue is there's not enough people to do the regulation. So what do you do then? How do you meet that need?
No, that's a great point. It's the government, obviously. There's a lot to say about that. Are they open to practitioners like yourself providing feedback on everything you just mentioned about LiDAR, the lack of technicians, things like that, and possibly suggestions on other technology you can use to actually perform this better?
They are. And every time we get a new ruling that comes out from the EPA, those rules go out and there's time for public comment. Public comment allows us to make adjustments. We've recently seen that from the sagebrush lizard, that public comment came out and everyone kind of talked about it. It's like, hey, this is something, but it's not as big as you're trying to make it out to be. Let's see if we can redefine it and make it. Now they're trying to push it again. So there's allowing periods for people to allow the government to actually hear what's going on. So we're all trying to figure out what's best. So, the questions is, we have now a 2-year window, and that 2-year window is 2023 and 2024. By 2025, anything that is not measured is going to be a taxable event. That's when all the IRA Act goes into play. So that gives us this short window of where we've got to get into compliance. Now, the problem is that we're all trying to figure out how do we handle that on all new builds and all equipment. The next piece of the puzzle is if they make this for all equipment, for everyone's older facilities, for all the stripper wells that are out there. There's questions coming in, talking about the difference between a flared and a vented gas. There's lots of facilities that are still out in the US today that vent off all the gas. Now, most of these facilities are letting gas directly go to the atmosphere from production because there's not a pipeline connection that they can move that gas to. So in that case, it's a low volume, but it is directly vented to the atmosphere, and there's no good connection. And people want to say, well, we need to push that to Bitcoin. Well, we would love to be able to push that to Bitcoin, but we're talking about 10, 20, 30 MCF, not enough to run a true Bitcoin mine. We need, somewhere around 200 to 500 to be able to run a Bitcoin mine and run it effectively. So there's a difference. So the question was like, all right, well, there's vented gas, then we have flared gas. At a current battery under Quad OB, we're going to have a high pressure flare that goes off if there is a high pressure event on a pipeline that doesn't allow us to sell. So that's allowing us to take pressures that are at somewhere above 130 pounds. We're able to take all of or 120 pounds. Any of our gas that goes above 120 pounds goes to flare and is burned off. That's when the pipeline can't take it. But we also have a low pressure flare, and the low pressure flare is taking the gas that we can't gather on our tanks, and so that can't have any obstruction. It can't actually have a meter in between the tanks and that flare, or else we run the risk of having damage to the tanks. So you're running 2 types of flare on every one of our facilities, but all of that is supposed to be burning off, somewhere around 95% of the gas that goes through it is being burned off. Hopefully your flares are working. I have detection devices on every one of my flares. If a flare is going, it detects if there's gas going through it and detects if the flare is not working. And if a flare is not working, we're sending people out within that day to go fix those issues. So, lots of ways that we are trying to capture all this gas. And at the end of the day, it's where are we not seeing that with our other technologies, why we have our flyovers, why we're doing the other things, and where are we finding those other lack of connection options where we need to find better solutions.
I'm going to go and throw in a few questions that are relevant to what we're talking about here. We got a question on, is it 2024 or 2025?
So the ruling it's not taxable until 2025. So we have a period of time to get everything into effect in 2024. But the problem is that means you have to be ready to go January 1 of 2025. You can't be trying to get in place by 2025. So as everyone knows, nothing happens overnight in the oil patch. So everyone's going to be working in 2024 to get into compliance, get everything up and running. But then the taxable events will start happening in 2025 moving forward. Now this is from my understanding, so take that as, I hopefully have it right, but we've been talking to everyone, and 2025 is where we go.
Another one on where does the methane certification align with the IRA methane tax?
So the problem with methane certification is there's lots of people that are trying to say, okay, we want to make a green gas, and that's great. We want to get certification that when we sell our gas, it is a quote unquote, green gas. The problem we're having in places like the Permian is there's not enough room in the pipe for all the gas we're producing. So even, there's no room to get certification. We just have to find ways to get gas into a pipe. The certification process would be, there's companies that are out there that'll help you in, as long as you're pushing everything out for seeing some of this stuff, we're able to, I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought as things are coming in, but we're able to gather the data and push it through to understand it. But if we don't, then we're going to run into problems. So, how do we get that certification? Those companies can help you. Smaller scale companies, it's real easy. But when you're talking about the super majors, trying to get a certification across a super major or even a company of our size is really difficult, because you have so many residual assets that you are gathering and mixing with new assets. For every horizontal well that's out there, there's 8 verticals that were in the same space in the past. So how do we get the 8 verticals in the same component as the one new horizontal that's all going down the same pipeline?
So I just had a question. I totally blanked on what it was. All these questions coming in threw me off there for a second. I know what it was. Certification. So I think that this industry, we fall in one of two buckets, and it depends on what you're looking at. We're either really, really good on standards, or we're absolutely terrible in standards. And I like to use the data standards and upstream with the PBDM, and you've got some new OSDU stuff. We can't agree on any sort of standards. Is there any sort of standard on certification on the methane certification? Because I know there's a ton of different companies out there. I don't honestly know the differences between them. I don't know if one has leapfrogged the others and got a lot of market share, if that's moving to kind of become the standard. There's one in particular that I've talked to people and I've got mixed reviews on. Okay, I'm not going to call it out here. It's not important. But from what I hear is that the standards, it's the goalpost keeps moving. We spend a ton of money, a ton of effort, and we get to a certain point and we get a certain rating, right? These ratings are, A, B, C, whatever. And you get to an A rating, right? You spend a lot of money, a lot of effort, a lot of time to get there. You hit it, new standards come out, all of a sudden you're dropped down to a C rating, and now you've got to do a significant amount of more work to where it's never ending, right? So, and there's a lot of different talking points there, but I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts on the state of this.
And that's the issues, is that for all of us that are dealing with this topic, the bar is constantly moving, the technology is constantly moving, and more importantly, operators are doing the best they can in the system they're provided. And a big part of the system is that we are tied into our midstream partners who are doing their very best they can, but they run an even greater risk in the IRA Act. And the fact that as we're operators, we have certain leeway, certain controls that are Quad O, but there is no Quad O for the pipeline systems. And so the pipeline systems with the IRA Act have a huge target on them for being able to make sure that they don't have losses and they don't have leaks. And we went through a system issue last year where we had a major plant downtime, and that led to a huge flaring event for us as a company. So even if we wanted to be certified and we would go through some of these events, 1 week, 2 week flaring event across one of my main midstream companies could throw me from being certified to, like you said, being bottom of the barrel in certification. And there was nothing I could do about it. It was all directly related to what did my midstream company have happen to them that then traveled downstream to where my wellhead is. So, it's hard to really get a certification that really makes sense, because we're constantly dealing with multiple variables that aren't all at the wellhead. Some of these variables are, is there pipeline space? If there is pipeline space, does everyone have electric compression? And oh my goodness, we actually had rain for once in the Permian over the last 6 months, and it knocked the power out for 24 hours. So the pipeline pressures are all spiked. So everyone's flaring down here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think there's a little bit of a conflict of interest of having a for-profit company giving out some sort of certifications. And I think that it needs to come in the form of some sort of nonprofit consortium, somebody that's a third party that has no incentive to give you any sort of rating whatsoever.
Well, we all fight that issue. I mean, from bank ratings to stock ratings to, just operational ratings. How do you set the right KPI that meets the right metric? And, we all have to measure what we think is best, because what we measure is what we will target, what we will go after. And if we get the right measurements, we will find the right tools to solve for those measurements. But we can't always get to you can't be stuck in what is the right measurement, because that measurement may change.
Yeah. Let's talk about, you touched on it a little bit, but let's talk about the implications for stripper wells. There's a lot of E&Ps out there. I mean, I don't think people realize just how many E&Ps there are in North America. There's about 14,000 last time I actually kind of like scoured some of the Enverus data. And an overwhelming majority, I want to say like 80% of them, are like mom and pop operators, right? And
Yep.
most of their operations consist of stripper wells. So wells that are producing less than usually 15 BOE or barrels a day, BOE equivalent. What are the implications for them with all these new regulations, new certifications, all this? I've been there with our small stripper well operation, and it's like the smallest of things throw off your entire economics, and it makes it just like not even worth it to continue to do that. And if you were to all of a sudden just kind of take aim at 80% of the E&Ps in the US with these small mom and pop shops, that's a significant amount of production that could potentially, come offline and have massive implications.
Well, and so the example I give to that is what we were talking about before. We've got better part of 4,000 vertical wells. Those 4,000 vertical wells end up having intermittent bleed devices that were installed on them when their facilities were built, because that was the device. Everyone bought a Balon valve. That was what you bought. You went through that and you did it. So, but the problem is those Balon valves bleed off the gas they use to control pressure. Well, those are now going to be not outlawed, but those are going to be negative impact devices. So we're going to have to go through, and we feel we have about better part of 12,000 of these in the field, and we're going to go through and do a mass conversion of these 12,000 valves at $250 a shot. So we're in the process of doing that right now. And other operators, I know other major operators have done that in the past. But as a mom and pop shop, if you're trying to do something like that, it's so much harder. If you look at their bottom line, when they're doing lifting costs on their wells, that is $20, $30 a barrel, trying to lift those, 10 to 15 BOE a day. And they're all of a sudden hit with these huge expenses across to upgrade all their facilities. Quad OA, Quad OB is not going to affect them, but when Quad OC comes in and it makes us do retroactive across all facilities, that could be a huge game changer and really change the overall market. But the hard thing we all deal with is the fact that our governments change. They change on a purpose. They change for a reason, because we vote for them to put them into place to lead us. And earlier this week, the government now decided that they don't want any LNG on pipelines. And it's like, well, you won't give me a pipeline and you won't let me go on rail. So now you're basically telling me you don't want to move LNG. But at the same time, you told the rest of the world that you want to provide their LNG for them to help them use natural gas to get off of coal and get off all these things. What's the right story? What's the right way? I can't air transport LNG. It doesn't just magically go from one spot to another. So it's about, how do we find the right laws? And I love our leaders, our political leaders, but man, most of them just don't understand what it actually takes to turn on a light switch. And so that's our job, really, is we have to help people understand and be vocal about understanding what does it actually take to do the job, to provide the world's energy, and more importantly, how does we lift the rest of the world up? There's 800 million people in the world that do not have a light switch to turn on in their home, that are living every day off of food or off of wood and off of dung to provide heat and to cook on. How do we get those people up, because that's 800 million people that there's an Einstein in the group that never got a chance to go to a school because their whole life, all they did was collect wood or collect water. How do we raise everybody up and look at it as the fact that energy is the one tool that raises all life expectancy across the world up? How do we help people figure that out?
There's a massive opportunity cost, like you said, like the next Einstein out there, the next Elon Musk, somebody who's going to go on and come change the world. And it just shows there's a significant amount of people that still need to be brought online in terms of energy and brought online in terms of the internet. Like there's so much upside, and I think we kind of get caught up in our little glass castle here of having all these modern luxuries and realize that the rest of the world, a lot of the rest of the world doesn't have that. Let's run through a couple more of these questions here. If you guys have questions, these are great questions, by the way. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to drop in the chat, whether you're on LinkedIn, YouTube, our website, whatever the platform you're on. Let's run through this one real quick. If a tax is imposed, then will the government accept company numbers? I would think the government would trust third-party certification more.
And there's a large part of subpart W that allows third-party companies to turn in emitters. So there's companies like groups like the Environmental Defense Fund. They've launched a satellite. That satellite's going to be running across the Permian all the time looking for emitters. Who's out there pushing off methane that they should be capturing? And I love those type of things because it's a matter of holding everyone accountable for what they're doing. The issues I run into, I've had two groups come out and use LiDAR cameras on what they thought were my facilities and then post things online and then say, here's a company that's not capturing their methane. Well, when we actually looked at the cameras and looked at the images, they didn't match any of our facilities. So we went out to the location, went to the GPS coordinates and looked, and they were filming the location across the road, but blaming us. And, so there's third-party groups that are going to be out there. And if you're using a satellite, the satellite issues are that you can see methane emissions, but you can't see what's causing the emission event. So all of us work around multiple operators in the same area and multiple midstream companies in the same area. And you could have a third-party event such as a blowdown going on at a compressor station for whatever reason, and that methane then be attributed to your production facility. And the issue I see with it right now is that our rule of law in the United States was that always that you're innocent until proven guilty. But a large part of the third-party certifications are going to claim that you're guilty until you prove your own innocence. And, what's going to be the right way of doing that? So, but the government is going to require everyone to turn in all their numbers every year. And then, those numbers will lead to the taxable event. It's no different than anyone everyone has to turn in their IRS notifications. Everyone has to turn in their income, their expenses, and what they're going to pay in taxes. It's going to run along that same type of certification. It's going to be, you are your own steward, and then you're going to be audited. And if you can't match up your audit, then there'll be penalties for you to pay.
Are there, so we're talking about the tax penalties. Are there any sort of like credits or rewards for becoming compliant or doing any of this?
We haven't found any as of yet. So it's this, reducing the negative outcomes is where we're at. There was operators the other day that had a major methane release that went unreported, and they got fined for it. So everything that's out there right now is about trying to, erase the negatives. It's not about trying to build on the positives of what the good companies are trying to do. So, there's no payday for getting an A. It's just knowing that you got an A at the end of the day.
Another great question. What are the biggest hurdles to accurate open air quantification, and what is considered accurate? Plus or minus 1%, 10%, 100%?
Yeah, and I think there's lots of, so I serve on the committee for Texas Tech, on the advisory committee for the school. And they're up there where they actually have built a facility with methane detection or methane release devices that they can run different tools and different services up there and be able to help them run tests to be able to get the right quantification. But at the end of the day, all these devices are good to a point, but they all are subject to the environment. And as we all know, West Texas, we can be sitting at 104 and have no wind, or we can be sitting at 104 and be sitting at 20 miles an hour wind, or we can be at 11 degrees and 40 mile an hour winds, freezing everyone. So I think the issue for all of us is that methane has different characteristics depending upon the temperature and depending upon the wind that's going through there. So what we're all trying to do is we figured out how we can see it. Now we're trying to figure out how do we build the best model for understanding what is that at different pressures and temperatures and wind models that are going through the region. So it's no different than any other technology we've found in the oil and gas space. We've started on it, but we're just really starting to understand it. And our understanding is going to get better and better as we do more testing at the university level. Colorado State's doing work, Texas Tech's trying to do work, Stanford's trying to do work. All these schools are trying to do more work to help us get better quantification. And the problem is we probably won't be at where we need to be by the time IRA goes in, but we will be getting there as you start seeing that there is a goalpost of what this cost is going to be. Every operator is going to be out there trying to find what's the best solution that we can make for that, how to reduce that cost.
So I think one of the things, last time you and I talked, one of the things you brought up is that your team is doing like 1 to 2 calls a week for new tech, mostly emissions tech. And one of the comments that you made was that technology is changing faster than we can evolve.
It is, and we constantly are getting calls from people. We're even seeing it right here inside of the chat. Have you looked at this? Have you looked at that? And we try to, but how much time do you leave in your day to look at new tech coming in? And so we actually use a lot of new tech screening companies to allow us to basically listen to what are the top of the top that are been screened out, and then see, do those make sense? You guys do Energy Tech Night, and several of the companies that were at the Midland Energy Tech Night, we were already in the process of implementing. So it's how they have to have some type of practical application being run, which is hell, because everyone's out there. I tried raising money as a PE, and I couldn't get any money because I didn't have any assets. Every PE backer's like, well, you get some assets, come, we'll give you some money. The same thing goes for technology. People want to know that you've got a trial going on the field. So how do you get in the door to get one of those trials up and running, proving your product works? And it's not easy. A lot of times it's about finding the champion inside the company that allows you that opportunity, and then seeing that your technology works. But like I said, if your technology doesn't work, if it fails, I'm going to have it out of here faster than you can blink. And it's tough because it doesn't give you much room to fail. You got to have a solid product when it hits the floor.
I feel like there's a lot of technologies that do a lot of things that are relatively similar in this space. If there's somebody who's an engineer who's maybe been focusing on this problem, maybe a little entrepreneurial, thinking about their next idea, are there any kind of like gaping holes that you see where we need technology to be developed?
So it's not so much gaping holes as much as it is culture changing ideas and helping people understand that the culture of the past is going to go away. The crew change is happening. We are seeing it every day that more and more of our 50, 60, 70-year-olds are now leaving, and we are now trying to get new people in, younger people in that are leading. And those cultural changes are what are going to define. The scary part for me is looking back at schools and seeing how many people are actually going into these programs. And there's not a lot of, the numbers are almost to where I graduated. And we joke about it because I graduated in 1996. There was about 111 petroleum engineer graduates in 1996. It's been listed as one of the lowest periods of all time of graduates. Well, that same number is coming around in 4 years, and we will probably see those same type of numbers again. So the demand for people is going to be greater, and the demand on the people is going to be greater, because every engineer coming out is going to have to be able to handle more because there's less people to do the work. So at the end of the day, what technology has to do is provide us the greatest opportunity for a employee to be as productive as they possibly can, to be able to take on more, do less. We focus in on managing by exception. How do we focus in on where are the problems, not looking at the breadth? You can't eat the elephant all at one bite. You have to eat it in the small little bites that you have. And as a company that's gone from no horizontal wells 7 years ago to now a company that's got over 1,200 horizontal wells, you can't look at every well every day. So how do you find the right tools to help you find where are your problems, focus on the problems and stop those? That's where our on-site detection tools, our flyover tools and things like that allow us to focus in on where are the problems, solve the problems, and if they are a repeat offender problem that we capture and we catalog and we database, how can we keep the repeat offenders from coming back up? What do we need to apply? What tools, what changes do we need to apply to keep them from being a repeat offender?
Another great question. Are you viewing the locations with older facilities as a liability due to quantity?
There's multiple liabilities from old locations. There's multiple people out here that are dealing with lots of those issues, such as, how do we plug wells out right? How do we manage the old wells? And as we drill new wells, do we keep the old wells online? Because the old wells are providing gateways for casing leaks and problems that's making the gas sour or other things like that. So older facilities are always the liability. The way we look at it is the fact that, out of our production, our older wells make up now somewhere around 5 to 6% of our total production, but make up 50% of our costs. So, but they hold the acreage. They allow us to go drill all the horizontal wells. So I think the question really has to marry with reports that have been coming out talking about when do we see peak Permian production? And, those numbers aren't that far away. They're talking about dates that are going to happen in this 10 years. And when that happens, all those older facilities, we're going to basically be purging the old facilities out and just keeping the new ones. So are they a liability? Yes, but it's a liability we have to be able to manage our drilling inventory that is still left to come.
On that topic, is there, I can't think of anything, but I'm kind of curious while we're talking about drilling. You guys have had just an amazing growth story that you and I touched on a little bit, prior to the call, and you guys have just been punching a bunch of holes in the ground, drilling a bunch of new wells. Is there does any of this kind of go into your thought process whenever you're drilling a new well in terms of like new criteria that you're looking for or just other things you need to worry about?
So it really comes down to the fact that we worry about lots of things. So what is going to come up to the highest level of worry, where I let my team kind of help devise that. What is the biggest worry for today? Let's fight that worry. Let's knock those things off. But methane for us is right at, like a lot of companies, it has now become one of our core metrics of one of our core KPIs that we're going to be measured against, and all of our compensation is going to be measured against. So that's why it's become such a big part of what we do every day now, is that we want to be a company that is not known for being a flaring company. We want to be a company known for selling gas, not flaring gas.
There's a bunch of great questions, guys. If you have any more questions, throw them into the chat. Shad, one of the things I appreciate about you is that for as long as I've known you, I feel like you're really in tune with a lot of your peers in the space at other companies. And I think that you kind of utilize that to, for one, be able to find new technologies, but also kind of just like benchmark where you guys are at. Like we talked about in the beginning of this call, you guys felt like you were kind of bottom of the barrel at the beginning, and now you feel like you've definitely made some major progress there. Where do you feel realistically you guys kind of are in the bunch? I mean, are you guys the absolute leader in this space? I know, or do you feel like others are doing it better? I'm just trying to get a sense of like the state of other operators. We can even just say operators in the Permian. Is everybody going as hard into this and really rolling up their sleeves as much as you guys are, or is there just a ton of work as an industry for us to catch up to you guys?
I think every major and large independent is out here doing this. How far they are along the path, a lot of people are in trial phases still, trying to figure out what tools do they want to go with, which one do they think is best, and that's fine. We've had people even in the chat talking about, hey, have you looked at this tool? Have you looked at this tool? We're constantly looking at what's the next best tool. But the question at the end of the day is, how do you find the next best tool at the lowest cost to provide you the best service? And where do we see we're at a point now that this is still an area of constant improvement. This is not a end game solution. What this needs to be a solution for is, how do we get better every day? And what are the little things that we can do differently? How do we plug wells better so that we don't end up having to have problems? What technologies can we apply so that we have less methane? Simple things of how do we change the tops of our tanks to use non-composite materials? Maybe that allows us to where we don't have as much corrosion, so we don't have gaskets leaking. All of this stuff is a constant changing, evolving process. So, one of our core metrics that we put inside of everything is, constant improvement, continuous improvement has to be a part of everything we do as a company. And with that, we can make things happen. And, there is so much work to be done that it definitely takes everyone sitting around talking. And like you said, it's about how many times do I sit around. I at least try to go once a quarter to try to sit around and talk with a bunch of my peers and just see, what have you tried? What's working? What's not working? And, is there something that we are trying that you want to know more about? And just, it's amazing how much you can get across the table if you just sit down and listen. And we're not in a competitive environment. The acreage is locked up. What we are in is a environment of how do we become the best stewards of everything we've been given. And if we can find a way for all of us to sit around and talk about these things and be good with the answers that we come up with, and all of us live with those answers. Not every company has the same end game. Private equities don't have the same end game as Exxon, right?
Yep.
So they're going to run things differently. But if we all agree to what are the bare minimums that we all should be doing, we can all find a better way of doing things for tomorrow. And that's where we're really trying to focusing in on, is just making sure that the communication lines are open. If someone has something, listen. If there's a new technology out there we want, and with the technology providers we're working with, it's about how can we make this better every day. Now that we've got it up, what are the next things we can be doing that can help make this the better solution for tomorrow?
We got another interesting question. If you guys have any more, we've got just a few minutes left, so we got time for a few more questions. So just throw them in the chat, and we will try to get to them. We had a question that says, can you help lead an industry consortium to strategize on third-party reporting from environmental activists from groups like Earthworks? I didn't know who Earthworks was. I just Googled them. Think of it as any other extremely anti-oil and gas group that I'm assuming is putting out some sort of reports around us. And I'm assuming that the question is sent around that the data is probably wrong. And is there an industry consortium to combat that?
There's not. And at the end of the day, the best way to fight what Earthworks does is to not put yourself in a position to where you're failing and they see you.
Yep.
That's, it's the hardest thing in the world. We joke about it, ex-football player, ex-lineman, the hardest job in the world is being a left tackle. Because when you're a left tackle, everyone knows when you fail because the quarterback gets destroyed. But when you do a good job all game, no one notices you, and the game just goes on and everything's fine. And the oil and gas space, we need to be an offensive lineman that never fails. We need to be the person that there should be no paper written about us failing. If we do that, then Earthworks doesn't have something to go on. So that should be our goal at the end of the day, is how do we become the best at who we are at what we do and not give someone reason to complain. Now, are we going to have events? Yes. So how do you keep that stuff from becoming a bigger issue? Is that invite Earthworks in, talk to them and say, hey, you found just like we ended up having to do. You found a site that was not our site. Here's our site. Do you want to go look at our site and film it? And we can show you it was not our site. But at the end of the day, we need everyone to understand that we make up less than, I think the number is, we make up 14% of the methane emissions in the United States, the oil and gas space says. But the problem is no one cares about the animal farm industry in the United States. They care about the oil and gas industry because we're big, bad, ugly oil and gas. So if we're big, bad oil and gas, our job needs to be, we need to be the prettiest big, bad oil and gas we can be, and make sure that we don't, as I said before, we need to be the Boy Scouts, leave no trace behind. We need to be the ones that make sure that we don't leave a trace for someone else to come pick up after us.
So I guess in closing, any other words of wisdom on how other E&Ps can be the best left tackle they can be?
So I think at the end of the day, it really is going to come down to what is the legacy you want to be left behind, and who do you want to be known as an operator? Do you want to be known as the operator that is leading the charge, or do you want to be the operator that is causing problems for other people? When you are an operator that fails and you bring light to one, that light gets spread across to everyone. So our goal at the end of the day should be for all operators to be a shining light of example of how do we provide the cleanest, best energy in the world to make the rest of the world see if we do things right and we do things correctly, we can make fossil fuels the best energy source to be used around the world for the need that it supplies. So my mission or my comment to anyone, all the operators out there that are thinking about it, pull the trigger, go out and start testing. At the end of the day, you'll figure out that you will save money, not spend money. And at the end, beyond all that, we need to set the bar so that everyone else understands that if you want to produce energy, we can do it the best in the United States, better than anyone else around the world.
I love it, Shad. This has been a great conversation. I always just love talking to you. I think you and I can just chat for hours. I think it's been enlightening, not just for the other operators, but anybody who's kind of just paying attention to this space. There's a lot of people in the chat that I think obviously work on the tech side of this space, and so we appreciate you taking time out of your super busy schedule to sit down with us and impart some of your wisdom of your journey with the group today.
Thank you for allowing us the opportunity. Endeavor's out there trying to do the best we can, but we know we fail, and we're not perfect. So people will find us at fault for different things at different times, but we are definitely trying to do the best we can to be the best operator we can be any day. So coming on and being able to share our story is a part of that message. How do we share it with others so that others can learn from our failures and fail fast and figure out what they want to do moving forward?
And I think that's what we need more of it. We need more collaboration. We need a little more open kimono in the space, because a rising tide raises all ships. And so I've loved this. This is the first power that we've done with with somebody from an E&P. And so if you're also with an E&P and you want to do something like this and kind of share some of the things that you've learned, whether it's through technology, it could be whatever, reach out, drop us a comment, send me or Julie an email, Jake at Digital Lockgetters, Julie at Digital Lockgetters. And I'm excited to do more of these in the future. So Shad, once again, thank you guys for participating. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks to all the great questions that we got. And we will catch you